Welcome to the 2020 SE versus iPhone 11 comparison. Yes, you are seeing two different shades of white. The SE is pure white and the 11 is a creamy white. Looking at the sizes, the SE is quite a bit smaller than the 11, but keeps the same design language, except for the front area where it holds onto the button. The white version finally looks great, now with the front being all black. So, what do we get with this new SE? Basically, a 2017 iPhone 8 which last sold for $449, but now slashed down $50 to $399. Next, it steals the CPU from the iPhone 11, and while it's at it, takes 3 out of the 4 GB of RAM and snatches the Wi-Fi 6. Pretty respectable at this price range. Let's continue to the comparison against the iPhone 11, which is my phone of the year for 2019. Unbeatable in price to performance and still peerless in early 2020. It has everything the expensive Pro line offers except for the telephoto lens and the OLED display, something you don't really notice until you're comparing them side by side. Otherwise, same RAM, same CPU, Dolby Atmos surround sound, Zoom mic, the works. And the icing on the cake, in my opinion, the perfect size. Okay, let's get started. So both phones use IPS LCD displays, basically with the same specs, differing only on resolution. So let's take a closer look. As far as info density, the 11 is of course much better with the bezel-less full frontal display. You can easily fit an extra post or two with a longer aspect ratio. The reflective coating performs the same between the two, with the SE having a slightly brownish tint and the iPhone 11 a grayish one. Alright, performance. Starting with Geekbench 5, I noticed something when testing the SE. It seemed to have massive fluctuations in performance when running hot. So this time I ran Geekbench 5 times to get the average scores to account for any slowdown due to heat issues, aka thermal throttling. So looking at the average scores, the single CPU score is remarkably consistent across both phones. But in multi, the SE has a 329-point deficit, making the iPhone 11 12.7% faster on average. So that got me thinking about the variation on scores. But what kind of performance fluctuation can you expect when pushing your phone? Well, the SE has a whopping 43% variation from its highest to the lowest score, versus the iPhone 11 having a more stable 27%. It's quite interesting. Wrapping up with GPU scores, there's a 4.8% difference. Not so bad. Moving on to a taxing graphics test with 3D Mark. We see a similar pattern. The SE comes in 1,400 points lower than the 11, which is a spread of 52%. Wow. So clearly, according to the benchmarks, the SE suffers from CPU throttling and gets worse in graphically intensive apps. At least that's what these synthetic benchmarks are saying. So let's check out some real-world tasks. I played Fortnite with settings at high graphics and 60 frames per second. It seems the game does not tax either of the two phones as they perform identically. Even if the SE was running warm, performance was not impacted. And finally, a custom export test, cutting the first minute, moving it to the back, slapping in a 30-minute title, and Gaussian blur effect. We'll export using LumaFusion. And it's a dead heat. I guess LumaFusion either is single-threaded or exports just don't exercise the CPU 100%. So in summing up performance, benchmarks tell a story of large performance gaps, but the practical tests such as export and gameplay tell a different story of equivalence. Testing battery life with the YouTube streaming test. The SE manages 8.5 hours. The iPhone 11 follows 3.5 hours later, lasting a healthy 12 hours. Playing Fortnite on each phone for an hour resulted in a 35% decrease for the SE and 31% for the iPhone 11. Your results will vary with the intensity of the gameplay, but I've included some estimates as a reference point. Now on to the camera, where there is actually a big difference. Starting with the specs for the main back camera, the 28mm lens on the SE is a bit narrower versus the 26mm on the 11, which also comes with an extra ultra-wide 13mm lens. The SE is working with an iPhone 8 camera, but equalizes things by benefiting from the image processing that the A13 chip provides. But due to the age of the camera or by design, it misses out on some of the newest features such as night mode, deep fusion, video HDR, and zoom mic, along with a handicapped portrait mode. Beginning with standard pictures, we actually see very little difference in good light. As mentioned before, night mode is non-existent, so in a dark room lit by a computer monitor, the 11 does an excellent job of keeping things sharp with much less noise. Portrait mode is a bit disappointing with the SE. It needs to detect a face to work, whereas the 11 will work regardless. It blurs out everything around the face, even on the same plane or depth of field, which is very unnatural, and that's a shame because I feel portrait mode is becoming the most important feature of camera phones. The 11 correctly puts everything in the same depth of field in focus and blurs outside of it. So the SE definitely has a leg down in that department. In video mode, you can really see the performance difference of the sensors. Even in good lighting, 4K 60 frames per second is noisy compared to the 11. Now switching to the front side camera, we have two very different cameras. The 11 is wide at 23mm and the SE has one that's narrow, even more than its rear camera at say around 30mm. The 11 can do 4K 60 frames per second with this front, while the SE is stuck at 1080p 30 only. In terms of image quality, they perform roughly the same with the 11 being less noisy, but giving you much more flexibility in terms of field of view. Alright, let's test out the audio. The SE speaker sound is flat, but loud. Not bad from a small thin body, but the 11 definitely has fuller sound, with the mid and lows being more present. For surround sound, the 11 crushes the SE. Playing the Dolby Atmos demo, it really is amazing. It's not a gimmick. It does truly sound like surround.
This is Dolby Cinema. This is Dolby Atmos. The number of speakers around you no longer matters. Because this...
Let's wrap up audio with a mic test, comparing the two iPhones and a Zoom H1 mic. People were pleased to find that Peter Piper had picked a couple pages for Fable fans at MSR. People were pleased to find that Peter Piper had picked a couple pages for Fable fans at MSR. Thankful that this was Thursday the 30th. Thankful that this was Thursday the 30th. Thankful that this was Thursday the 30th. The Piper anticipated form, fun, and a wonderful weekend of recording. The Piper anticipated form, fun, and a wonderful weekend of recording. The Piper anticipated form, fun, and a wonderful weekend of recording. The two iPhones sound identical. Both pick up voice sounds extremely well, seems to isolate the mids especially. The Zoom does a better job of balancing the ambient sound and sounds a little bit better. But from a dedicated mic, that's to be expected. So the iPhone should be great at recording lectures and interviews. So there you have it. Performance-wise, in the real world, it can hang with the flagships and the iPhone 11. That will make the SE stay relevant for at least the next 4 years. But in other areas, it is a full generation behind the 11. There's three main things to consider when deciding on the SE. Price would be the most obvious. It's $300 or 75% more to move up to the 11. So you would have to make that determination. Size, maybe it's too small and it's just unusable for you. And number 3, experience. If you want the flagship experience that comes with the 11 with the better cameras, better speakers, bigger screen, better battery life, the works. Okay, that's all for this video, and please do make sure to check out a video review entirely shot on the SE that will be posted soon, comparing the popular 30-year-old Cost Porter Pros versus the 2017 KPH-30Is. I feel like everyone should own at least one of these headphones. Thanks, and see you next time.